Well, hello there. So you're working with web components. Maybe it's the first time you get your hands dirty trying to conjure up some UI components using custom elements, or maybe you're getting serious about it and you're starting to compose web components together, custom elements together, and building them into what is starting to look like an actual application. No matter what the case may be, you might be getting to a point where things are getting serious and it's no longer just about the UI, but you need to get some data. You need to get some data from some data source, possibly a backend API or third-party API, through the internet, through the wire. So how do you do that when you're dealing with web components? There's different options, and there's been different patterns and solutions that have been proposed in the front-end community over the past several years. But I'm going to show you today the one that I prefer. So I've got this little simple application. It's using Vite as the bundler. First time I try it, like it so far. And it uses lit element as a thin wrapper over Web Components API. It makes working with Web Components custom elements just a little bit more fun. Using, for instance, a render function in your component, which allows you to use templating like this. So that's what we're going to be using. But don't get confused. This is actually a custom element using web components. It's not some sort of complicated framework like Angular or whatever, right? It's just a thin wrapper over web components. So what you see is a list here. It's a to-do list, really. Do something else, do yet another thing. But what you can see from the template here is that at the moment, the list elements, I've hard-coded them as templates, right? As actual HTML elements right in there. So obviously that's fine for, for starters, for getting your UI set up and playing with the styles and all of that. But at some point in your feature development, you need to start thinking about the data. Where's the data going to be coming from? Actually, maybe before where is the data going to be coming from, you need to think about what is going to be the data. What shape will the data be in? What type, right? We're dealing with TypeScript. We can think in terms of defined types. I like what I like to do if I'm working on a vertical slice, a feature that's a vertical slice. So in essence, where the backend, the data source hasn't been implemented yet, and I have the luxury of doing things kind of like in the order that I want, I usually prefer starting with the UI, right? And defining the kind of data that I want to get as the UI, right? What would I like to get from the backend? And then I go and implement that in the backend afterwards. So we're going to kind of like take this approach here. So what we might do in our development at some point is move away from this hard-coded HTML elements, these HTML elements, and start dealing with actual data. So if we're thinking about the kind of data, so let's do that. Let's create a to-do file. And we're going to define our type. Our type's going to be called to-do. And we're going to need, so if we're looking at our template here, sorry, this one. Well, we need our to-do items to have an ID, right? So an ID. It needs to have some label or text or name or something like that. And it has a state, right? Whether it's checked or not, right? So these are the three things I can think about. And that's what we're going to put in there. So ID of type number. And then texts. Sure. I think I like description maybe better. And then done. I'm going to go with completed as a Boolean. Okay. So that's our data structure, really. That's what we're going to be dealing with. So now what we can do is create an internal property, an internal reactive property. And to do that with lit elements, we use the state decorator. And we're going to, yep, that's exactly what I want. Need to import that to do. Okay. And I guess at that point, I can start putting in some fake data here. ID1, description, do something, completed, true. Yeah, okay. Actually, let's change that just so that we know we're using, let's go with get. Well, I guess it doesn't matter because we're going to be deleting this, but yeah. Get bread, and then get butter, yeah. And get cheese. Okay, cool. Love Copilot. And let's make the middle one a completed one. Okay, so now we've got our data in place, our fake data, but we're still pulling from, we're not pulling from that. We're still using the hard-coded HTML. So let's get rid of, well, at least these here. We're going to be looping out. We're going to be looping over our array here, our to-dos array, and using that to create our list. So the way to do that here using lit elements is, so we're essentially using a templated string. So we need to escape that. Let's see, like this, which allows us to do that. Yeah, map. Okay, thank you. And we're going to be mapping, so that's a to-do. To-do is going to be returning HTML. Okay, and in here we can have this stuff. Perfect. Like that. And okay, so now the input needs to actually be to-do.id here, actually in the same thing here. Type checkbox, that's fine. That's going to be always that for each one. Checked. Okay, so that's going to change. And I think lit, you can use the question mark in front and then do this. Is that right? We're about to find out. Completed. And then this will be, yep. Wait, yeah, okay. And this is to do description. I get this right. Get bread, get butter. Get butter is done. It's completed, right? And then get cheese. Perfect. Cool. So we are now using actual data to populate our to-do list. Now the problem is it's still hard-coded data. We're not getting that data from the backend, are we? We're not, we're not getting it from some sort of REST API. We're not getting it from some sort of whatever third-party REST API. It doesn't matter where, what, how. We just know that like we can't have this be hard-coded. That's not what we want to end up with, and it wouldn't make our component very useful if that's what we did, right? So okay, so here's the question: how do we get actual data into our element here? Well, one option would be to use, the fetch browser API, make a backend call, make an API call, and go and get the data. But we don't have our backend API endpoint set up yet. We haven't done the backend work. So that's not really an option, is it? It'd be nice, though, if we kind of acted like that was the case so that we can put in place the mechanism. So one inclination would be to go, okay, well, let's use You know, and all the different libraries and frameworks have their own version of this, but basically there's lifecycle methods, right, or functions where you can kind of hook up into the lifecycle of the component. So we're going to use in this case, what's it called? Callback. It's something callback. Well, connected callback. Connected callback. There we go. Connected callback is what gets called when the component is being connected to the DOM, is what I remember. Is added to the documents DOM. Yeah, okay. So good. And in here, you know, if you already had your backend set up and all that, that's probably what you'd be inclined to do, right? Let's fetch from, okay, let's make this async, just to make it a little nicer, which means we need to return a promise here. And fetch returns a response object. Response, await, yes, okay. And then you need to get the JSON from that. So this to-dos await. Yep, that's right, okay. The only problem we'll have though is that, okay, let's see. Pretty cool that Copilot is suggesting this. I'm just not sure what the shape of that data is. Let's so you guys can see here. Let's call this and see what we got. Okay, user ID. This isn't mine, by the way. This is I don't know, some. I remember this. I remember this. So I guess this is pretty cool. I'm just curious. Hold on. Let me see. Yeah, like a whole kind of fake API thing. Pretty neat. Okay, but this is the one we're interested in. Oops, crap. Okay, which one was it? To-dos. Okay, there we go. So user ID, we don't really care about this for this demo. ID, yes, we do. Title and completed. Okay, so let's get back to the code, which is here. Okay. So what do we need to change here? Our to-dos ID. What was it? Title? I think it was title. Was it title? Yes, it is. Right? We've got the data showing up. Yeah, I guess it is. Okay. Oh, got to change the style here real quick. Give me a second. That's probably checklist height. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we're obviously replacing our fake data here by the fake data we're getting from the API, which, you know, like at this point you might be inclined to say, yeah, cool, we're done, right? Well, not really, because as far as, you know, it's not, this isn't great. I'm not trying to start a debate here, but right, what if you want to test this component in isolation, right? Now, when you try to instantiate this component, you're going to make a fetch call automatically, or kind of almost, right? Depending on how you do it, end up doing it. It definitely makes it harder, right, to test, and you don't control what's being called or what the data that's being fetched. So not ideal, right? We would want a way to be able to inject whatever data we want into that component so that we can test various scenarios. At this point, this kind of makes it hard for us to do that, right? So, and then there's the fact that, well, this is still fake data. It's not our real API endpoint. Now you could say, well, that's fine. We're just going to work with this for now. And when you do make the real API endpoint, just come in here and modify this, and then you're done. You could do that, of course, right? But also the problem is that at this point, this thing which is supposed to be a UI component is now also fetching data, is like in charge of, you know, reaching through the internet and getting data from somewhere. And that's a separate concern, right? So it should probably be another piece of our code that's in charge of getting data, right? All right, so then the question is, how do we get that data, right? And there's like all kinds of different ways to do this. One very simple and popular way in most frameworks and UI libraries to just pass it in as a property. So instead of having this internal state for our to-dos, we can actually make this a property, and then whatever parent, component could just pass that in. And that's perfectly viable, but it's not always an option. What am I doing? Okay. So yeah, it's not always an option. Maybe this component is a top level component. So there is no parent, or there is one, but it doesn't make sense for that parent to be in charge of getting the data for us. So maybe this is the entry point. This is where we want the data to come into our component tree. So how would you do that? In a framework like Angular, for instance, one way to do this would be to create a service, a separate class possibly, and inject that class, that service, into this component. And this is what I'm going to show you. How can you do this with web components? We're not in Angular here or other kinds of frameworks where this kind of mechanism would be already put in place for us. So we need to figure out how to do this with web components. And you'll see that there's a little, there's a bit of a gotcha. There's a little bit of an interesting challenge that we have to overcome in order to do this. And I think I found a pretty decent workaround. So, okay. So first, let's set up our service, right? The code that's going to be in charge of getting our data. I'm just going to do that right in our to-do file here. Now, you could create an entire interface and a class, but because normally you would want to get the to-do items, but you'd probably also want a way to update them and create a new one. And we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to get them, right? So I'm just going to do a function instead of a full-blown class, right? I'm going to keep that simple. Actually, you know what? Let's start by looking at what this would look like inside our component first, and then we'll implement our concrete function based on what we would like to do here in our component. So instead of doing this here, we want to inject a function that does that for us. And the best way that I know of injecting dependencies into a class is to use the constructor. It's one of the most flexible and explicit way of doing it, as far as I'm concerned. It's really my preference. So we'll go ahead and create a constructor, and I guess we need to do anything in the constructor? No, we really just need to provide a. We're going to call this getToDos. GetToDo is going to be a function, and it will return a promise of to-do arrays. Yes, that's exactly what it's going to do. Okay, and read only. There we go. And now we can get rid of, let's see, we can get rid of all this. And what we're actually going to do is this dot to-dos is equal to await this getToDos. Yes. And now we're still seeing our get bread, butter, cheese, and all that. And the good reason for that is because, well, this is kind of the hard-coded data that we've put in there. And also because we don't actually have a getToDos, right? We're trying to call it here, but as you can see from my browser console, type error, this getToDos is not a function, right? So that's, this call here is actually breaking. It's not working. So we're left with our hard-coded data, which is fine for now. We can leave that to here, I guess. Actually, you know what? Let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of it. So now we've got an empty array, so we've got an empty list. Okay. Okay, now let's go ahead and implement a function that has that signature. And let's call it, okay, well, let's start with our fake data. So let's call it get fake get fake to-dos. Yeah, this is a function, right? Get fake to-dos. We don't pass in any parameters. We are returning a promise of type to-do array. Yes. Okay, which we're going to do return promise or resolve. Yeah, that's essentially what I want, but not this data. So let's use the same things we had on here. There we go. Okay. Okay. Great. And you know what? Let's do this as well. Let's do okay, let's pretend like that website there that had those fake to do. Let's pretend like that's our actual, you know, the real endpoint we want to use in our app. Oh, look at that. It's funny how like get real to do's, but it gives us like the fake placeholder thing, but that's actually what I want here. So that's great. Yes, that's exactly right. Except might as well make this function async and use response equals fetch. Really doesn't matter. That was fine. It was fine the way it was, but I'm so used to async await now. Const response, and then we need await, of course. Await, and then wait. Did I put the what did I do wrong? Get async. Oh, it's. I believe that's what I need to do. Yes. And okay, response, then we do return response.json. Here you go. Okay, this should work. Now, okay, so great. Now we've got our service. Actually, we've got two versions, right? Two different implementation of our interface. Our interface is a function signature. So we have two implementation of that interface that we can use in possibly different contexts, right? Maybe in the test environment, maybe, you know, there could be all kinds of reasons. The thing is, now we've got flexibility in our design. But now we need a way to inject that one of those functions, right, into our constructor. So when do we do that? Well, we do that when we construct, right? When we instantiate the class. Where do we instantiate the my element? We don't. And that is the problem when you're using web components, custom elements. The browser is taking care of instantiating those classes for you. How does it work? Well, you see this little decorator here, custom element. This is just a nice little utility that essentially does this for you. Custom elements dot define. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Copilot. All right. So that's the browser API that will register a myElement tag to your element class. And that's how the browser knows to, let's see, when it encounters the myElement tag in its, you know, and the DOM and the element template, it knows to associate this with our myElement class. And then it'll instantiate the class, right? And associate it with this here. So the browser takes care of instantiating those classes, those custom element classes for us. The problem is that the browser expects a constructor without any parameters because it wouldn't know to inject a getToDo function into it. It has no notion of a getToDo function. There is no mechanism in place within the browser for us to tell the browser, hey, by the way, when you see the myElement tag, this is the class that's associated with it, and these are the dependencies I would like you to inject into it. That's not the way the API is made. But that doesn't mean that we can't kind of do that ourselves, right? And that's what I'm going to show you. How do we circumvent this kind of problem? The fact that the browser is expecting a constructor without any parameters, but we want the constructor to have parameters. All right, let's see how to do that. So I could do that in this file here, but it might be helpful to, especially if you're dealing with more than one just component, which you likely are if you're designing more than just like one UI component, but some sort of little application maybe. So it can be useful to kind of create what you can consider the entry point into your little application. So let's do that. Let's create a, I guess traditionally it would be called the index.ts. So let's do that, I guess, index.ts. So now we need the browser to pull from index.ts instead of our my element. And as you can see, it no longer knows what to do with my element, the my element tag now, because index is empty. And so first thing we can do to make sure that the mechanism works is to just import the actually, here's what we'll do. I'll just show you that the custom element decorator from lit, it really is just a wrapper around what I was showing you before. So we're going to do that in our index.ts. We're going to do custom elements.define my element and my element. Yes. Now we need to import that. And there we go, right? Our browser now knows what to instantiate to create our class. And this is why we're seeing the things now. So that's great. Okay, but how do we get our data, right? We're still not getting our data. Oops. That's interesting. Okay. It doesn't like that extra space. Yeah, I don't know why I did that. Okay. So at that point, what we can, let me just move that here for now. Okay. What we can do is solve our problem. How do we inject our getToDo, our getToDos into our class? Well, we can't, not into our class there, because the browser wouldn't. That's what it's doing. It's got to be the one to instantiate it. So there's a few different ways to go about this. But the idea is that this define function here expects a tag and a constructor function. Is that even like, what's the name of that thing, right? Constructor, custom element constructor. So what we need to do is pass it a function that is a constructor function. Constructor function is a function that that works with the new keyword. So essentially a class. That's basically what it is, right? There's a few different ways to define them in JavaScript, but the simplest way now is to just pass it a class. So what we need to do is make a new class that wraps our myElement class and that has no parameters, right? So we can do something like this. Const, let's call it wrapper equals, it's a class that extends our myElement like this, and all the functionality is already defined in myElement, so we don't need to worry about any of that stuff. We're really interested in just providing a parameterless constructor to the browser, and so this is where the fun stuff happens. We're calling super, so we're calling the myElement constructor. It's complaining because it's saying, hey, you should be passing in the getToDos here. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So this is kind of like our own dependency injection system. Really, really kind of basic one, but essentially that's what we're building here. So let's pass in our get fake. Is that what I called it? Get fake to-dos, I think. Let's see if we can import that. Maybe not. To-dos. Get fake to-dos. I'm not exporting them. So that is the problem. I am now exporting them. I should be able to import this here. Yes. And if we now pass the wrapper, right? Remember, and our wrapper is just the extended class here. What happens? We get the data. So the browser is essentially instantiating this class here, but this class here extends my element, and it calls its constructor, passing in the dependency it needs, right? So this is a really kind of simple little mechanism that you can use to have constructor injection with your web components. And you obviously, right, you could have like a little application that has a lot of different little components that are defined like this, and you'd end up with, you know, maybe your index here would end up with like a bunch of these like that, and it could be a little hard to maintain and find your way around in this thing, so you might not want to do that. So what you could do is create a nice little utility function. Let's call it register component. Right? And our register component would take a component constructor. It would take a component constructor. The signature of that would be new function that returns, let's say, a lit element, right? Or a class that extends, right? That's the point from lit for this particular app, because we're using lit element. But you could do HTML element, which would still work for me because lit elements are extending HTML elements. So I think we could actually do that. Let's see. Let's find a way. Okay, and of course our constructor would take dependencies. So it has, let's say, and now it would need to be any, and this is spread one. So this is just a syntax to say this function should work with new, and it should, you know, we will assign all the dependencies to this depth property, which will be an array of all the dependencies, all the arguments. And okay, so that's what we need. And would this return anything? No, it would not, right? So at this point, this wraps our custom elements dot define. All right, and we need a tag, so let's put that here. So let's call it tag. What do they call them? Define takes in a. They go with name. I guess we can go with name. Keep the same kind of component constructor. Yeah, okay. So then we can just pass in name, and then we can just pass in component constructor. And then, okay, yeah, but we're not, this needs to be actually our new class, right? Class extends our component constructor. And this is where we're doing this thing here. Okay, yeah, and we also need to have a depths property. Oh, nope, no. That's easy mistake to make. This is actually, okay, let's split this up a little bit. I'm dealing with reduced horizontal space. So like that. There we go. Okay. So here we're calling our super. Nope, we need the constructor first. Yep, like that. It knows what I'm trying to do. There you go. We're passing in the dependencies, right? So now we don't need this anymore. We don't need this anymore. And we can use our register component, my element, get getToDo. That's exactly what I need. And here we go. That works. Great. So there you have it. Relatively simple way, I think, to kind of build your own little DI thing here, where you can have custom elements that expect dependencies in their constructor and have it all still work and be able to decouple your components from logic, from data access stuff, which, you know, is a good practice and gives you a lot of flexibility in reusability. For instance, I just thought about this. I'm not sure that's going to work. Let's give it a shot, but you could potentially, let's say there was another app or another part of the app where you wanted to reuse this thing, but with different data. Would this work? Let's see. I'm not sure. My other element, and then, you know, same class, but different data. What was the other one? Get real data, real to-dos, right? Okay. And now let's pretend, I have no idea what that's going to look like because I didn't do the styles for this, but let's pretend that we're going to be passing in right below it. What was it? My other element is probably going to look really weird. And yeah, let's pass in the same thing here. So now we have our first one and our second one. Yeah, the styling looks horrible, but you can see that we're using the same component class twice. We're using different tag names because that's how we registered them in our little DI system. And we're passing in different dependencies for the data. And it works, right? The one is using our fake data, and the other one is using that API that we saw, the JSON placeholder. I didn't think to give that a try as I was prepping for this, but so the style looks horrible, but it works. You get the point, right? This gives you a lot of flexibility. Like I was able within a second to reuse that very same component with complete different data without having to make a single change to that component's code. And that's a sign of good design, of good code design. All right, so there you have it. I hope you thought this was interesting. If you did, please like this video and consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you.